It was a quiet evening inside the restaurant. The kind of evening where nothing unusual ever happened, and nobody expected anything to break the rhythm of routine. The warm lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow across the neatly arranged tables. The sound of clinking plates and murmured conversations blended together, creating the usual background harmony of a place that served the rich, the powerful, and the people who pretended to be both. In the middle of it all moved a young waitress who blended into the scenery so naturally that guests rarely noticed her, unless they needed something. She had been working there for almost a year, long enough to know every corner of the place and every habit of the regular customers. She knew which guest always complained about the soup being too hot, which ones snapped fingers for attention, and which ones never looked her in the eye. She handled all of it calmly, quietly, never making a fuss. Most people assumed she was just another worker trying to earn her paycheck. Nothing more, nothing less. She didn't mind that people didn't see much in her. She was used to it. Living simply had taught her that attention often came with expectations she didn't want. She preferred to do her job, earn her living, and keep her dreams tucked inside where nobody could judge them. But even so, there were moments when she wished someone, just one person, might look at her and see more than a uniform and a serving tray. That evening, the restaurant had been reserved by a group of wealthy guests for a private gathering. They were loud, confident, and carried the kind of energy that made it clear they were used to having the world bend toward them. At the center of the group was a well-known millionaire. Someone the staff whispered about, often partly because he was famous, partly because he had a reputation for expecting perfection. The group settled around a long, polished table near the front of the room. The waitress was assigned to them not because she was the best server, but because she was the calmest. The manager believed calmness kept things from escalating when people with too much money and too little patience got irritated. As she approached the table with a tray of drinks,
Ow!
She heard their laughter. They weren't laughing at anything she understood. It was the kind of laughter people shared when they felt untouchable. At the far end of the room stood a grand piano shining under the soft lights. It had been placed there for ambiance and occasional performances. But tonight it sat untouched. One of the guests pointed toward the piano and asked the millionaire if he remembered the last event where the hired pianist played so poorly that everyone pretended to enjoy it. The group laughed loudly. The millionaire, amused, leaned back in his chair and glanced at the waitress. "Maybe she can play something for us," he joked casually.
S.
As if the idea itself was absurd, laughter erupted around the table. Some guests leaned in with teasing smiles. Others covered their mouths as if embarrassed on her behalf, but never truly. The waitress kept her expression neutral, but inside something tightened. She wasn't angry, just used to comments like that. People often assumed that a simple job meant a simple life with no hidden talent or story behind it. She placed the drinks gently on the table, thanked them politely, and stepped away without reacting. The laughter faded as the conversation shifted to business. Expensive vacations and art auctions, things far from her world. She continued her work, clearing plates, refilling glasses, and moving through the room with steady steps. But the joking remark lingered in the air like a small sting that refused to disappear. She had heard comments like that for years. People judged quickly and rarely wondered if there was more than what they saw. She remembered the old piano her father had found years ago, scratched and missing a pedal, but still capable of producing music that made her feel alive. She had spent countless nights practicing on it, teaching herself pieces she found online, losing herself in melodies when life felt too heavy. Music had always been the place where she didn't feel small. Yet here, in this expensive restaurant, she felt like that part of her didn't belong. She was a waitress, nothing more. At least that's what the world believed. As she walked back toward the kitchen, she heard the manager call her name. His voice sounded slightly stressed, the way it did whenever something unexpected happened. She followed him behind the counter, where he explained that the pianist scheduled for later in the evening had just canceled due to an emergency. The manager looked uneasy. The restaurant prided itself on flawless evenings, and he knew the guest, especially someone as influential as the millionaire, would not be pleased with a missing performance. "Do you still know how to play?" he asked quietly, his tone half hopeful, half unsure. She blinked, unsure how to answer. She hadn't touched a grand piano in months. She practiced at home occasionally, but nothing prepared her for playing in front of a room filled with people who judged everything. The manager continued. I heard someone mention once that you used to play. Look, I'm not asking for anything fancy. Just something simple so they don't complain. It's better than nothing. She hesitated. She imagined the room full of eyes watching her, waiting to see if she failed or proved their assumptions right. But she also remembered the sound of those notes from her old piano, the way they filled her chest with something warm. She nodded slowly. If it helps. I can try. Relief washed over the manager's face. Thank you. Just do whatever you're comfortable with. When she returned to the dining area, the guests were still talking, laughing, and enjoying their evening as if nothing could go wrong. None of them knew what the manager had just asked her to do. None of them expected anything from her except quiet service. As she glanced at the grand piano, her heartbeat quickened slightly. It looked beautiful, almost intimidating, under the warm lights. She thought about the millionaire's joke earlier, and the laughter that followed. She wondered what they would think if they knew she could actually play, but she didn't want to prove anything to them. She only wanted to help the manager and do her job. What she didn't realize was that the moment she touched those keys later that night, her life would never be the same. The moment she agreed to play, something inside her shifted. It wasn't confidence, not yet. But it was a quiet acceptance that sometimes life pushed people into moments they didn't choose. She walked back toward the dining area, her steps slow, steady, as if the air around her had grown heavier with expectation. No one else knew what she was about to do, and for a few minutes, she liked it that way. It gave her a small sense of control in a place where she usually blended into the background. The large doors from the kitchen swung open, and she stepped out with a tray of water glasses. The guests barely looked up. Their voices filled the room, mixing with clinking cutlery and laughter that rose and fell like waves. The millionaire sat at the center of the group, sharing a story that had everyone leaning forward, fully entertained. She placed the glasses down carefully, hoping her hands didn't look as shaky as they felt. She noticed how comfortable they all were, as if the world existed only to respond to their wishes. She had seen people like them her whole life, people who carried themselves with a confidence she never felt she had. But tonight, something felt different. Tonight, she wasn't just the one collecting plates or refilling things. Though they didn't know it, she was about to step into a spotlight she had never asked for. As the minutes passed, she moved from table to table, her mind drifting back to the old piano at home. She remembered sitting in front of it late at night after long shifts, her fingers gliding across chipped keys, creating sounds that gave her comfort. Music had always been her way of escaping the world, but she had never imagined she would be asked to share it with strangers, especially not ones who had laughed at her earlier. The manager approached her quietly when he saw a moment where the guests were distracted. He leaned close and whispered, "Whenever you're ready, just make it simple, something gentle." She swallowed hard and nodded. She didn't know what she would play yet, but she trusted her hands would know once she sat down. They always did. As she walked toward the piano, her heartbeat quickened. She could hear the soft hum of the room behind her, the sound of conversations fading as she reached the center of the space. Some guests noticed her approaching the instrument and exchanged puzzled glances. A few whispered to one another, surprised that the waitress was even going near it. The millionaire's eyes widened slightly. He didn't look annoyed, just curious, like he was watching something unexpected unfold. He raised a brow, leaning back in his chair. "She's actually going to try," someone from his group muttered with a half-dashed smile. Another guest chuckled, shaking their head as if they were about to witness something amusing. She heard all of it, but she forced herself to breathe deeply. One slow breath in, one slow breath out. She had learned long ago that people's opinions hurt only when she believed them. Tonight, she would try not to. She reached the piano and gently pulled the bench back. The polished surface of the instrument reflected the warm lights above, giving it a soft golden glow. She sat down, her posture stiff at first, unsure if she belonged in front of something so grand. For a moment, she simply placed her hands on her lap, letting her eyes travel across the keys. They looked smooth and cold, untouched all evening. She lifted her fingers and brushed them lightly over the keyboard. The familiar feel brought back memories she had forgotten, quiet mornings practicing scales, long nights learning pieces she loved, moments when music felt like the only place she didn't feel invisible. Behind her, the room grew quieter as more people noticed her sitting at the piano. The laughter softened. Conversations faded. A soft ripple of curiosity moved through the guests. The manager stood off to the side, watching anxiously. He seemed more nervous than she was, though he tried to hide it. She placed her fingers on the keys, choosing a simple melody she had learned years ago, one she often played when she needed calm. It wasn't complicated or showy. It was gentle, warm, and easy to fall into. She pressed the first key. The soft note floated through the room, barely louder than a whisper, but it carried weight. It carried feeling. It carried the quiet strength she rarely showed. Her hands began to move slowly, gracefully, following the melody she knew so well. The room fell even more silent. The guests leaned in. Some sat back with surprised expressions, realizing the music was better than they expected. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. Once she started playing, the rest of the world slipped away. Every note felt like a step deeper into a space where she wasn't a waitress or someone to laugh at. She was simply someone who loved music. Her fingers picked up the pace, gliding across the keys with ease she hadn't felt in a long time. The melody grew fuller, more expressive, and the sound wrapped around the room like a soft blanket. The gentle hum of conversation had vanished completely. All that remained was her music. She could feel the change in the air, even if she didn't see it. The guests who had laughed earlier now sat silently, listening with wide eyes. The millionaire, who had joked about her earlier, leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable, almost stunned for the first time that night. She felt something powerful, not fear, not nerves, but something closer to belonging. As she continued to play, her mind traveled back through moments of her life. She remembered the times she had played when she was sad, the times she played when she was hopeful, and the times she played simply because it made her feel alive. Each memory poured into her fingers, shaping the sound in a way no words ever could. The guests weren't just listening. They were feeling the emotion behind her music. The melody softened as she reached the end of the piece. She finished with a gentle touch, letting the last note linger in the air. A deep silence followed, not an awkward silence, not a bored one, a stunned, breath-held silence. She slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her heart pounding. She didn't look up immediately. She wasn't sure she was ready to see their reactions. Then, suddenly, the silence broke, soft at first, one pair of hands clapping, then another, and another dot. Within seconds, the whole room erupted into applause. It wasn't the polite kind of applause people give out of duty. It was real, full, almost overwhelming. Guests who had ignored her earlier now looked at her with admiration in their eyes. A few even stood from their seats, clapping louder than the rest. The millionaire remained seated, but his face had changed completely. The amused smile was gone. In its place was a look of sincere surprise, maybe even respect. She stood up slowly, unsure what to do. She gave a small nod, her cheeks warming as she stepped away from the piano. The applause continued as she made her way back toward the corner of the room. The manager looked relieved and proud, giving her a quiet thumbs up as she passed. But the night wasn't finished. Something even more unexpected was about to happen. As she reached the edge of the dining area, she heard footsteps behind her. Someone was following her. She turned slightly and saw the millionaire approaching, his expression serious but calm. He stopped a short distance away, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. That was... He paused, searching for the right word. Unexpected. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. He continued, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She hesitated, then answered softly, "At home. I just practiced a lot." The millionaire nodded slowly, still processing what he had just heard and seen. For a moment, he didn't say anything more. Then he gave a small, thoughtful smile. "Keep going," he said quietly, before walking back to his table. She watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. The night had not gone the way she expected, not at all. But deep down, she knew something important had changed, something she couldn't explain yet. The guests returned to their conversations, but now the tone was different. Their voices were softer, their expressions thoughtful. Some glanced toward her occasionally, not with judgment, but with a new kind of curiosity. She went back to her duties. But her steps felt lighter than before. She didn't know what the future held. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of something she never saw coming. She didn't sleep much that night. Even after her shift ended and she walked home under the cool night sky, the sound of the piano keys still echoed softly in her mind. Every note she had played replayed itself, reminding her of how the room had changed the moment the music began. She stayed awake thinking about the guests' reactions, the applause, and the look on the millionaire's face. For someone who rarely found herself at the center of anything, it felt almost unreal. When she woke up the next morning, it wasn't exhaustion she felt, but a quiet sort of energy. She couldn't explain it. Something about the night before stayed with her, almost as if it had left a small spark inside her chest, one that she hadn't felt in a long time. She got ready for work as usual, tying her apron around her waist and pulling her hair back. Everything felt familiar, yet the air around her seemed different. When she walked into the restaurant, the staff greeted her with a tone she wasn't used to. It wasn't that they had been rude before, not exactly. They had just never looked at her with so much attention. One of the cooks, who rarely spoke more than a few words to anyone, nodded at her and said, "You played well last night." She blinked, surprised. "Oh, thank you." Another server, who had been working there longer than anyone else, pulled her aside and whispered with a grin, "Everyone's been talking about you since yesterday." I heard the guests were impressed. She gave a small smile, unsure how to respond. Compliments still felt strange. It's like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit as she moved through her tasks. She noticed how the other servers glanced at her with more curiosity than before. Some even seemed a little embarrassed, remembering how they had laughed with the guests the night before. She didn't hold it against them. People often followed the mood of the room without thinking. The morning passed quietly, and the restaurant slowly woke up with small groups of customers visiting for breakfast. But around midday, the manager called her into his office. She walked in nervously, unsure if something had gone wrong. He closed the door gently and sighed. "Listen, I want to talk to you about last night." Her heart skipped for a moment. "Did I do something wrong?" The manager burst into a quick laugh. "Wrong? No, not at all. If anything, you saved the night. I don't think you realize how much you helped." She relaxed a little, though her shoulders still held some tension. He leaned against the desk and crossed his arms. "That billionaire who was here, he asked about you this morning. Actually called the restaurant." Her eyes widened. "Called? For what?" "To ask your name." The manager shrugged. "Said he wanted to speak with you when he comes in tonight. He has another reservation." Her stomach twisted with surprise and something close to nervous fear. The millionaire had seemed impressed last night, yes, but she hadn't expected him to seek her out. People like him didn't usually remember people like her. The manager went on, "I don't know exactly what he wants, but if he asks you anything, be honest. Don't downplay your talent." She nodded slowly. "I'm not sure what to say to someone like him. You don't have to say anything special. Just be yourself." She gave a soft smile. In her experience, being herself had rarely been enough to catch anyone's attention. But she appreciated his encouragement. The rest of the day passed in a haze. She continued her work, but her mind drifted often. What did he want? Why had he asked for her? Was it simply curiosity, or did he have something else in mind? She tried not to overthink it, but the uncertainty followed her everywhere. Evening arrived faster than she expected. The lights dimmed, the tables were reset with fresh candles, and the atmosphere shifted into something more elegant, something meant for the wealthy dinner crowd. as she polished glasses behind the counter. She felt a quiet rush of nerves building in her chest. When the doors opened, she saw him enter the millionaire from the night before, surrounded by a smaller group this time. He carried himself the same way as before, confident, relaxed. But something in his expression seemed more thoughtful. She stayed focused, trying not to make herself noticeable. But it didn't take long before the manager signaled her over. She walked toward the table carefully, her steps light and measured. The millionaire looked up at her with a calm expression. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," she replied softly. He studied her for a moment, the way someone studies a painting, curious and focused. "I wanted to thank you again for your performance last night. It was unexpected in the best way." She lowered her eyes a little. "I'm glad it helped the evening go smoothly. Did more than that," he said. "It changed the mood completely. My group couldn't stop talking about it." Compliment felt almost too heavy to hold, but she nodded politely, unsure how else to respond. He leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, do you play often?" She hesitated. "Only at home. When I have time, are you trained?" She shook her head. "No, I learned on my own." It surprised him. "Everything you played last night was self-taught?" She nodded again. He exchanged a quick look with one of his companions, then returned his focus to her. "Have you ever considered doing something with your music? Performing? Training officially?" Her breath caught for a moment. "I never had the chance. Life just didn't go that way." The millionaire drummed his fingers lightly on the table, deep in thought. There was a long pause before he finally spoke again. "I'd like to hear you play again tonight," he said simply. She blinked. "Tonight?" "Yes, if you're comfortable." "I want to listen properly this time." The request left her stunned. She had expected a thank you, maybe a polite remark, but not this. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt something shift again inside her. The manager, who had been watching the interaction from the side, gave her a subtle nod, encouraging her. She took a quiet breath. "If it's all right with everyone, I can play later." The millionaire smiled gently. "Good, I'll be waiting." She walked away with her heart pounding louder than it had the previous night. Playing once had been surprising enough. Playing again directly for someone like him felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. She continued her work as the evening went on. But her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. She knew the moment was coming. The room buzzed with quiet conversations, the soft clatter of cutlery, and the hum of people enjoying their meals. But underneath it all, she felt a strange pull, as if the piano itself called her, finally. The manager approached with a small gesture, a signal that it was time. She wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and walked toward the piano once again. This time people noticed immediately. The room quieted slightly. The millionaire sat up straighter, his attention fixed on her. She sat down at the instrument, her hands resting gently on her lap for a moment. She could feel the weight of the room, the curiosity, the expectation. But instead of fear, something else filled her a steady calm. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. This time, she didn't choose something simple. She chose a piece she had practiced for years, one she never shared with anyone. It was harder, richer, emotional, something that carried her memories within it. Memories of quiet nights at home, moments of loneliness, and moments of comfort. She began to play. The first notes drifted into the room, soft but full. The melody rose slowly, shaped with care and emotion. Her hands moved with more confidence than the night before, gliding across the keys as if they belonged there. The room grew still, completely still. The guests turned their heads to watch. The staff stood frozen for a moment, listening. The millionaire leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on her. His expression softened in a way she hadn't expected. As she continued, the music deepened. It wasn't just sound, it was expression. It was the part of her she never showed. Every rise and fall in the melody carried something real. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The piano was enough. When the last note finally came, she let it linger for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her hands slowly and let out a quiet breath. Silence. A heavy, meaningful silence. Then, Applause, stronger than the night before, louder, fuller. The whole room joined in. Even people who hadn't listened to music in years clapped like they had never heard anything so pure. She stood up, her cheeks warm once again, but this time, the warmth felt different. It felt like something growing. She took a small step back from the piano. And in that moment, she knew, without fully understanding why, that her life was beginning to change in ways she never expected. The night after the performance felt different in the entire restaurant. The staff moved quietly, almost as if they were still processing what had happened. The millionaire's shocked face, the unexpected applause, the way the room had frozen the moment her fingers touched the keys, every detail replayed in their minds. But no one felt the weight of it more than the waitress, who had stood at the center of it all. She arrived for her shift early, partly because she couldn't sleep the night before. Her thoughts ran in circles. She kept asking herself if she had done the right thing by stepping forward. She hadn't meant to humiliate anyone or change the mood of the evening. She just wanted to help the man who had been struggling at the piano. But now, the entire city seemed to be talking about her. The restaurant manager met her at the back door. He didn't look angry, but there was something serious in his expression. She wasn't sure if she was in trouble or about to be thanked. Her stomach tightened as he motioned for her to follow him to the quiet side of the dining room. He sat her down and took a breath, as if choosing his words carefully. He explained that after last night, the restaurant had received dozens of messages. Some came from people who were in the room and wanted to praise her. Others came from strangers who had seen short recordings taken by the guests. Nobody had expected a simple waitress to play like that. Nobody had imagined that behind her humble apron and quiet steps, she carried a talent powerful enough to silence a crowded room. She listened, feeling both proud and overwhelmed. The manager continued, telling her that a man claiming to represent the millionaire had called earlier that morning. At first she didn't understand why. She thought maybe the man she helped wanted to thank her. But then the manager explained that the millionaire wanted to speak with her personally. He didn't give details, only that the call would come later in the day. The waitress didn't know how to react. She wondered what she could possibly say to a man who owned a dozen businesses and had influence in places she would never reach. She felt a wave of nervousness wash over her. But the manager placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, letting her know she had nothing to fear. When the call finally came, she stepped into the small office behind the kitchen, the only quiet space available. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone. The millionaire's voice was calm, almost warm. He thanked her for helping his guest the night before. And then he did something she never expected. He apologized. He said he had misjudged her, just like everyone else in the room. He admitted that he had joined in the laughter when she walked toward the piano. He confessed he had assumed she was stepping forward out of ignorance. But when she began to play, everything changed. He told her that the piece she performed was one he had loved since he was a young man, and hearing it played with such emotion had touched him in a way he couldn't fully explain. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to such direct praise, especially from someone like him. She thanked him softly and tried to move on. But before she could end the conversation, he told her he had one more thing to ask. He said he had connections to music schools, studios, and private teachers. He knew people who could help her grow. He asked if she would be willing to meet him, to talk about opportunities, no pressure, no obligations. Just a conversation. The waitress froze. She had dreamed of studying music for years, but money had always been the problem. Lessons were expensive. Instruments were expensive. Everything about pursuing that dream required resources she didn't have. She told him she needed time to think. He said he understood and that she could take as long as she wanted. After the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at the floor. Her mind drifted back to when she was younger, sitting on the old piano bench in her family's small home. She remembered her mother humming in the kitchen, her father tapping his foot in rhythm, the gentle encouragement that had filled the room every time she played. Those memories had guided her through hard times, especially after life became more difficult and responsibilities pulled her away from music. The idea of returning to that world felt almost unreal. During her break, she stepped outside into the cool air behind the restaurant. The sun was low, casting a warm glow on the alley walls. She leaned back against the bricks and breathed deeply. Trying to slow her racing thoughts, one of her coworkers stepped outside and asked if she was okay. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed herself. She explained what the millionaire had said. Her coworker's eyes widened with excitement, but the waitress felt something else: fear. Fear of failing. Fear of disappointing others. Fear of stepping into a world where she might not belong. She spent the rest of her shift moving slowly and distractedly. The customers blended together, their voices fading into the background. Every time she carried plates to a table or refilled a glass, she wondered if she was really capable of taking the next step. She had lived a simple life for so long. Was she ready for anything else? When her shift ended, she walked home through quiet streets. The city lights shimmered on the pavement, and a gentle breeze brushed against her arms. She kept her head low, deep in thought. She knew this moment would shape her future. But she also knew she couldn't make a choice based on fear. At home, she sat alone at her small dining table. She had an old keyboard in the corner, one she barely had time to touch anymore. She stared at it for a long moment, before finally moving toward it. She plugged it in, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. She played slowly at first, letting the notes roll out one by one. She didn't play for anyone else. She didn't play to impress. She played because it reminded her of who she was beneath the long shifts and quiet nights. The sound filled the room, gentle but full of emotion. As the music carried her thoughts, she realized something important. The performance she gave at the restaurant wasn't meant to prove anything. It wasn't meant to earn applause or surprise a crowd. It was simply her way of helping someone. And maybe that was enough. She didn't need to become famous or chase recognition. What she needed was the courage to explore her talent again. Even if the path was uncertain, the next morning she returned to the restaurant with more clarity in her heart. She didn't tell anyone her decision yet. She simply worked her shift as usual, greeting customers with a gentle smile and moving gracefully between tables. But inside, she could feel a change. She knew she would call the millionaire back. She knew she would meet with him and at least listen to what he had to offer. She didn't know where it would lead. She understood one thing clearly. She couldn't let fear make the choice for her. As she wiped down a table near the window, she caught a reflection in the glass. For the first time in a long while, she saw hope in her own eyes. Her journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. She woke up the next morning with a quiet heaviness in her chest. The kind that comes when life is offering you a path you never expected. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the small sounds of the morning birds outside. A neighbor closing a door, the low hum of a car passing by. Simple sounds, familiar sounds. They kept her grounded as her thoughts drifted back to the night she played the piano and the offer that now waited for her decision. The restaurant wasn't open yet, and she didn't need to be there for a few hours. She sat at the edge of her bed and held her hands out in front of her. She stared at them as if seeing them for the first time. These hands had carried trays, washed dishes, wiped down countless tables, and helped customers who barely noticed her presence. But they had also played melodies that had once filled her home with warmth. They had created moments of peace in her life when everything else felt heavy. Now, someone wanted to open a door for her because of those hands. She didn't rush herself. She wanted to think clearly. So she made a cup of tea and sat by the small window in her living room. She watched people walk by on the street below, children heading to school, a couple arguing softly, a man jogging with tired eyes. The world outside looked the same as always, unaware of the struggle inside her. Her mind drifted back to her childhood. She remembered practicing for hours, not because anyone forced her, but because she loved the music. She remembered the small concerts she played at school and the way her parents used to clap as if she had just performed in a grand hall. She remembered dreaming of studying music seriously one day. But dreams are delicate, and life doesn't always give space for them. After her parents passed away, she had stepped into the responsibilities they left behind. Bills needed to be paid, and there was nobody else to help. She had let the dream go quietly, piece by piece, until only a faint version of it lived inside her, and now, out of nowhere, a single moment, a single note. A single choice to step forward had brought her dream back into the light. She finished her tea and finally stood. She knew what she had to do. She picked up her phone and dialed the number the millionaire had given her. It rang only once before he answered. His voice was calm and respectful, as if he didn't want her to feel pressured. She told him she was willing to meet and hear what he had in mind. He didn't sound surprised. Instead, he simply asked when she was available. They arranged to meet that afternoon at a quiet cafe near the river, a place she had passed many times but never entered. When she hung up, her heart beat faster. It was happening. The choice was made. She spent the next hours getting ready for work, though her mind wasn't fully there. Even as she tied her apron and greeted customers, her thoughts kept returning to the meeting. She tried to focus on her tasks, but she found herself glancing at the clock more often than usual. When her break finally came, she removed her apron and left the restaurant with the quick steps of someone who didn't want to lose courage halfway there. The cafe was warm and quiet, with soft music playing in the background. She saw the millionaire sitting at a table near the window. He looked different from the night at the restaurant, less like a man used to luxury and more like someone who genuinely wanted to listen. When she approached, he stood and greeted her politely. They sat, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She felt nervous again, but the calmness in his expression helped steady her. He started by thanking her again for what she had done. He told her that her performance had stayed in his mind since that night. He said he wasn't exaggerating when he told her she had something rare, something worth nurturing. Then he explained what he wanted to offer. It wasn't a contract, and it wasn't a promise of fame. It was simply an opportunity, access to a music teacher who had trained many successful musicians, a chance to study without worrying about the cost, and support to help her find her place in the world of music if she wanted it. He emphasized that she didn't owe him anything. She could accept or decline. She could try it for a while and step away at any time. The choice would always be hers. His sincerity surprised her. She had expected conditions or hidden expectations, but there were none. Only a quiet belief in her potential. She took a moment looking down at her hands again. She imagined them hovering above the piano keys. Not as a waitress stepping into a spotlight she never asked for, but as someone who deserved to explore the gifts she carried. She looked up and met his eyes. She told him she wanted to try. The relief on his face was subtle, but clear. He gave her the contact information for the teacher, someone known in the city for both skill and patience. He told her that the first lesson could be as early as the following week. When the meeting ended, she walked out of the cafe feeling lighter, as if the world around her had stretched open a little wider. The river beside her moved gently, catching the afternoon light and scattering it in quiet patterns across the surface. She returned to the restaurant for the last part of her shift. She didn't tell anyone what had happened yet. She didn't want to speak too soon or raise expectations. She wanted to take each step slowly and honestly. That night when she got home, she sat again at her old keyboard. It wasn't perfect. Some keys were slightly out of tune, but she didn't mind. She played anyway, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was pretending to be someone else. She felt like herself. The following week, she attended her first lesson with the new teacher. The studio was small and filled with sunlight. The teacher greeted her warmly, studied her hands, asked her to play a few notes, and then smiled with a kind of recognition that made her chest tighten. The teacher said that she had something rare, not just skill, but feeling. She said that with practice and patience, the waitress could become someone people remembered. Hearing that made her eyes sting with emotion. She nodded and took a deep breath. Over the next months, her life became a blend of work and music. She continued her shifts at the restaurant because she didn't want to abandon the place that had been her home for so long. But after every shift, she went to her lessons. She practiced until her fingers ached. She learned new techniques, explored new pieces, and slowly discovered parts of herself she had forgotten. Word about her talent spread quietly, but steadily. The teacher recommended her for small performances at local events. She played at community gatherings, cafes, small halls, nothing grand, nothing overwhelming. Each performance helped her grow more confident. Some nights, Customers who had once laughed at her approached her with admiration. They apologized without even needing to say the words directly. She accepted their change of heart with grace. As time passed, the millionaire attended one of her small performances. He sat in the back, not drawing attention to himself. When she finished, the applause was warm and genuine. She saw him smiling proudly. After the show, she found him and thanked him quietly. He told her she didn't owe him thanks anymore. She had done the hard work herself. Her journey wasn't about fame. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't even about the millionaire's offer. It was about rediscovering herself. And she had done that note by note, step by step. Months later, she still worked at the restaurant part-time. But now, she walked with her head a little higher. Her coworkers treated her differently, not because she was becoming known, but because she carried a confidence they had never seen before. She still played the old keyboard at home, even after she saved enough to buy a new one. The old one reminded her of where she started. It reminded her of the dream she almost forgot. One evening, as she sat in her small living room, her window open to the quiet night breeze, she played the same piece she had performed the night that changed everything. As the last note faded, she realized something important. Life hadn't magically become easy. She still had bills, responsibilities, and uncertainties. But she wasn't the same person she had been before. She had found her voice again, and it all began the moment she stepped forward, ignored the laughter, and chose to play her truth.